Hello, everybody. Thanks for coming along. Some of you travelled a long way, I guess. We're Ann and Peter Sansom. You have to guess which is which of the poetry business in Sheffield. The poetry business will be in its 40th year next year. We're a workers' cooperative, started way north of here in Huddersfield, but we've been over here nearly 20 years. And 10 of those have been running something called the New Poets Prize, and the two winners, this year's winners, we're very pleased to be introducing today.
Okay, so as Peter said, it's our 10th year. We're publishers. We publish the North Magazine, Smith's Doorstop Books, do writer development, writers' workshops, and that sort of thing. And this year we were particularly pleased that Holly Hopkins agreed to judge the New Poets competition, which is open to writers from the age of 17 to 24, because she was one of our earlier poets that we met. She was a foiled young poet, and then she won our poetry competition.
When we judged it.
Yeah, when we judged
the main competition.
No.
That was
but
fun.
You know, she's sort of come up from being a young writer herself and is now in a position to judge this competition, which is very important to us because it's how we get to know the new beginning writers. Often sometimes have had some success already and they're interesting writers, and we don't want to miss out on them. And so we'll be hearing from Jayant and Sia, and Holly will introduce them and have something to say about their writing. For the competition this year, we'll be running it again starting in the autumn at the end of this year. But these are the 24-25 winners, so we're very happy to.
Can I just mention the two runners-up, who are Zelda Cahill Patton and Charlie Jolly, both of whom I know that Holly really liked. We like them too very much, of course. And so they'll be appearing in the North magazine alongside the two winners, which is at the printers now, the North magazine. It's also available electronically. It's really special time for us. It's 5.5 hours later, I think, in India. But everybody is very much awake, and we hope you will be thinking of questions that you want to put in the chat to ask at the end when Holly has a Q&A with the two winners. And we're going to hand over to Holly now.
Yeah. Thank you, Holly Hopkins.
Hello. I'm really excited to be here to celebrate these two fantastic pamphlets. It was an absolute joy to judge the competition and to find these poems. We didn't have the full pamphlet. We had, I think, a sample of 12 poems per poet. And I remember just the excitement I felt when I found these amongst amazing poems, but still you have that moment where you're like, this is exciting. I want to find out more. I want to read more. The first poet I'm going to introduce and we're going to listen to is Sia Mangat. Sia is a poet from London. Her work has been published in 14 poems, Galdem, Propel and Bath Mag, and has been broadcast by the BBC. She founded and edited Zindabad, a zine for people in diasporas worldwide, and facilitates writing and zine making workshops. And Rachel Long said about Sia's work, punk, princess, scissor sharp, jewel-like, each poem is a riot, is a revelation. This is the collection every immigrant mother, auntie, and all of her nieces, some nephews, and closest confidants have been waiting to gossip about. A thrilling new voice in poetry. And I remember coming across these poems in the stacks of submissions and being struck by the empathy and generosity and imagination for people that allowed this poet to create characters, but not just individual characters, but relationships between them. It's not unusual to read poetry and be struck by someone who can do a really good monologue or really good monologue for a character, but for someone to be able to build a portrait or a story about a whole family and to look out to a whole community, that takes a level of empathy and imagination which was exciting, and I wanted to read more, and I'm looking forward to hearing some more now. So introducing Sia, I'm looking forward to hearing your poems.
Thanks so much, Holly. That was a really generous and kind introduction. I really appreciate it. Yeah, thank you so much to Ann and Peter and the rest of the Poetry Business team. I've really loved all of the New Poets Prize pamphlets for a while, especially I'm thinking of Boy Got the Banjos and Phoebe Stooks and Charlotte Shevchenko Knight. So I feel very privileged to be among all these big names. I'm gonna start at the end. I've got 2 poems in here that go like this. So if I look like a bit of a mug reading from it, that is why. This poem is called Headliners, and I wrote it after I went to an open mic and I came home feeling annoyed. Headliners. I cut out pictures of beautiful white women in magazines. I cut around each of their fingers and stick my tongue out while doing it so no one thinks I'm taking it too seriously. I cut out their lips precisely. I cut out their names, stick them to my t-shirt. I cut out their legs, rearrange them into salads on my bedspread. I cut out their eyelashes one by one. I prefer cutting through glossy paper so my scissors can glide sharply around their hips and elbows. I cut out the heels of their shoes. I cut out their manicures. I cut out the captions describing who they are wearing. I want to spell out something with their fingers. I want to assemble a beautiful white girl and glue a microphone to her lips. She will look up and tell us all that everything will be okay. She has always been, in fact, beautiful. The only person who has ever told her otherwise was herself. But I don't, because when her magazine friends slice themselves into applause and she smiles, almost cute, I will want to lift my scissors and cut myself a way out through her glossy mouth. Yeah, I should have maybe mentioned at the beginning, when I'm not writing or doing sort of poetry stuff, I do a lot like zine making and cutting stuff up. So I thought it'd be fun to write a poem that was all cut up like that, as you can see on the page. One of the sort of big themes in this pamphlet is the life and legacy of Lady Diana, God rest her soul. This poem is called Before the Revenge Dress. Before the revenge dress, there was a slow revenge of the leather jackets who had grown tired of holding each other accountable when the wardrobe door shut. And before that, there was a revenge of the trousers who had been packed into the suitcase, their creases pressed and starched into sharp lines. And before this was the revenge of the blouses which immediately went see-through when wetted with tears or milk, which was often. And before that was the revenge of the hoop earrings who unpaired themselves whenever the drawer reopened, inspired by the revenge of the socks who conspired to only ever disappear one at a time. It began when a ring appeared from a box and slid onto a finger and was twisted round and round for years. Big, blue, nervous planet. It began with a dress that sobbed and expanded to fill the air it was given. It began with a piece of white lace that paved a runway the length of its terms and conditions. It began with a skirt the sun shone through to reveal a pair of secrets which the press reported on for weeks. It began as a roll of black fabric somewhere in a boutique, and like all good revenge, it knew itself well. Taut, tight, photographable. A little bit of trivia. I really love the way that the colours have paired of mine and Jayant's. I think Holly showed us on screen a second ago. I love the pink on Jayant's, but this blue is taken from Princess Diana's sort of engagement photo. Yeah, bit of fun insider knowledge for you. I'll do another Diana poem. I wrote this while on like a normal afternoon. I was watching her full wedding video on YouTube, and I was also thinking about like the wedding video that my parents had, or like people in my family have had, where they have all these sort of wacky edits that would have happened around the same time as hers. Indian wedding video. Diana's face emerges from a glittering lotus flower. The videographers got the studio number flashing at the bottom of the screen. Her name spins on screen one letter at a time and sparkles, calling her daughter of, like karaoke with her parents' names. Diana's stepping out of her carriage and into a waterfall compilation. Her face folds and unfolds over a rosebush, trembling, after the videographer nudged it with his foot. The aisle looks so much longer on tape. If she were to watch this back, Diana would fast forward herself proceeding into this new life. Extra pixels have been sewn into her veil, especially. Diana's body blooms from her groom's parted lips. At the altar, her eyes are coins falling into his lap. The videographer slowly zooms in until Diana wobbles. There's no kissing in an Indian wedding video, so later, he will nuzzle together a pair of bright pink daisies. For now, the videographer yawns and polishes his lens. He's waiting to catch her sobbing before she's driven away with her groom, but when the new couple return down the aisle, Diana throws a glance off camera. Well, let's move away from Our Die for a little bit. I'm going to read a slightly more fun one in the same spirit called Inventory of Aunties. Aging auntie with milky eyes that can barely make out the lights in the Gurdwara hall. Auntie would laugh that peels down Southall Broadway like cheap rhinestones off a suit. New auntie so richly perfumed with incense that her nieces shrink in horror. Auntie with swollen wrists, bangles biting into the flesh. Auntie's chewing. Auntie's chopping onions. 20 or 30 aunties who swap salwars in the colours of parakeets and perch at the back of the longer hall, watching. 20 more with swollen arteries and beige bra straps, laser hair removal leaflets in their purses. Auntie's chopping garlic. Auntie whose fingers begin with gold bands folded into flesh and end with tips rooted in her daughter's oiled scalps. Auntie always clamoring to name newest baby. Auntie's chopping ginger. Auntie licking Holly off her finger. Auntie's on WhatsApp. Auntie wearing your eyes. Auntie wearing your mouth. Auntie wearing your nose. Auntie whose face you don't even know, reaching to unclasp her chain and press it into your palms. Yeah, I had so much fun writing that one. I would strongly recommend doing a list poem of your aunties. I feel like sort of a universal thing to have lots of aunties whose names you don't even know. Backstroke. Princess Diana's birthday was in July, which makes her a Cancer. The human body is around 65% water, but Princess Diana's body contained significantly more than that because she was a Cancer and had a tumultuous personal life. Inside Princess Diana's silk shirts and shoulder-padded blazers, her heart sloshed around, but no one ever listened closely enough to hear it over the noise of the camera shutters. Once, she visited a woman in hospital who leant her head on the princess's chest, mainly for the photos, and told her nurse that night that she could hear something splashing in there, like kids at a community swimming pool or sparkling objects, perhaps ice cubes clinking at a party in everyone's drinks. Her nurse didn't believe her. It's difficult having a heart as blue as that. You get breathless up the stairs. You find yourself jealous of the baby on the bus, lying on its back, reaching for the top of its buggy. Your heart needs central heating in December, so you consider strapping a hot water bottle to your chest, but that feels too much like guarding a secret. Princess Diana was clearly too beautiful not to have secrets. She must have dreamt of jewels sinking to the bottom of the swimming pool and how the water shot up her nose and into her brain if she tried to reach for them. After Princess Diana died, an FOI revealed that over 1,000 pages of data had been accumulated by the National Security Agency, who organised them in a filing cabinet which was not waterproof. Princess Diana's favourite way of swimming was on her back, because she was a Cancer, and she knew that someone was always watching. To finish, I think I'll read Detonator. Detonator. On the way up the new mega drop tower at Thorpe Park, your Maya's kicking her feet, watching the trees below shrink and shrink, and about halfway up, the wind is strong enough to rustle the thick Kodak dark of your dad's hair. It is 2001 and they are both terrified, so your Ma is holding onto her seat as if it were a boyfriend. Your parents aren't sure if they still count as newlyweds at 110 feet. Your dad asks, "What's the point of all this? Shouldn't we have a baby?" And before he reaches a question mark, a teenager chewing gum 115 feet below presses the big red button. During the fall, your ma squeezes her eyes shut and screams while hundreds of tiny socks, bottles, your favorite gold hoops, the diameter of her little finger, sing in the air around her ears. Cool. Thank you so much for organising this online launch reading. And I'm really excited to hear Jayant read from his pamphlet too.
Thank you, Sia. It's amazing because I've been working with you on these poems for I can't remember when we judged the competition, but I haven't actually heard you read them yourself. And it's fantastic to finally get to that stage and hear them out in the world and soon in the hands of all our readers who are listening here. You are a reader and you will buy this pamphlet. And this one, Jayant. Jayant Kashyap is an Indian poet and author of two previous pamphlets, Unaccomplished Cities, that's the Go City Press, 2020, and Survival, Claire Songbirds, 2019, and a zine, Water, by Skier Zines in 2021. Kashyap won the Young Poets competition at the Wells Festival of Literature in 2021 and was awarded a Toto Award for Creative Writing in 2025. I'm going to read what Miriam Nash has to say about his work. In these tender poems, definitions, etymologies, and repetitions perform a kind of excavation, digging into the root places, but also layering back up, hand over hand, word over word, to build a language of grief that feels fractured and true. And I think what drew me to these poems and made me kind of stop in my tracks as I was reading through all the entries was perhaps the thoughtfulness and playfulness with language that allowed Jayant to bring a sense of life and liveliness, even when talking about the most serious of subjects, and a kind of refusal to stop thinking and playing, but serious play, even when faced with things that are complicated and difficult. Let's hear the poems themselves. Welcome, Jayant.
Hello, all. I haven't got a physical copy as of now, but soon enough. And before that, I'll just read some of the poems from my pamphlet. As it is, right, like in the real world, there's quite a bit of death in the book too, probably a little too much. But let's begin with the title poem. It's called Notes on Burials. Notes on Burials. Bury, verb, to put or hide underground, to cover completely. From burrow, or from berg, German, which is to fortify, as in to protect, as in to provide with possessions, food, pots and pans, things to wear, and even a toothbrush and a comb, this physical manifestation of life when the soul travels to the gods. It is said a burial is holding on to the dead, so the body, this cold soil, cloth, is taken in a ship along water, as in water between earth and heaven or hell. Water, as in Styx or Veterni, and some burn their dead before, because fire purifies, because souls cling to the material, this physical manifestation, but oh, to be free of oneself, with nothing left to remember. And I'm putting some earth on the grave of a friend's friend to say this is what we give you for rest. That while the wait is long, and it always is, when God is here, he will know you were loved. We'll have found ways to tell him this, and that you never knew death. In the past couple of years, I've seen several deaths, and some of these poems were in ways inspired by those. Uh, yeah, that is the essence of it, which is why. So there's a lot going on in the pamphlet, and when you read all of it, which I hope you do after buying it, you'll get it in, you'll understand how life and death work together in this pamphlet. And I've tried to write it in ways that would be the most honest from all perspectives that are possible for me to look from and look at. There's another poem, it's called Ruins of a House. Ruins of a house, the patio always too lonely, with only the sun watching over, the walls painted with the absence of photographs, the plaster falling off in places, the floor colored differently where once there must have been a sofa, a bed, soft faded soul marks all around like people still standing just there, too still, too old to move, as if something to do with bones. Teenagers under torchlights always sneaking in through the window after dusk, falling on a dust-laden carpet, and sometimes kissing each other, sometimes smoking or running from parents. Kids must have played in this room or in the one next to it, the meals, and often snacks would have been in the hall. But then someone might have left, or someone must have had to leave. And a home falls right after this, after acts of leaving. Dilapidated, adjective from dilapidea, Latin verb, scatter as if throwing stones, and nothing grows a stone's throw from this ruin but snowdrops, clovers, and herbs, and time performs the most perfect disappearing acts. Also, in the past few years, I've become very interested in etymologies. So every now and then you'll also see exactly that thing scattered through the poems. Um, it was in the previous one, Notes and Burials. It was here in Ruins of a House. Then one without etymologies, any of those. This is called Child Father. This was published in Miracle Monocle and has an epigraph from Joe Bolton's poem Alcohol. The epigraph is, and of my father who lost his life twice, once in himself and once in me. Child Father. 1. I dreamt of him again. He stood there on the patio like a bird, searching for a saucer of water. I could see him putting his needs in my once fragile hands, his eyes finding the ounce of kindness he once taught my brother and me every day and in small ways. 2. In my fist husked the grains, in my left hand the saucer. 3. Yesterday I read somewhere that having a father means having the luxury to be an atheist, to not believe. For years after mother's death, he plays mother. 4. And then, once your father, old and screaming, everything you once screamed from atop his shoulders, your father, childlike, and now a bird. Then there's this poem called Witness. Witness for A. First, more recently, the birds have been occupied by the estranged deaths. There isn't much we can do, but take the blame for a while. Before the trajectory shifts, that is. Sometimes it's a little absurd. Second, we are now developing new terms to say we have realized. Climate conscious, carbon footprint, eco-friendly, ornithophile, afforestation, green, activism, green, etc. But in truth, we haven't. Third, our exiles are worthless if we cannot delineate our crimes. Climate murders, crises, genetic exploitations, artificial selections, excavations and exhumations, and again, artificial selections. Seals, whales, terns, herons, bees, flamingos, bees, etc. Christ, how did we get here? Fourth, imagine the earth as a spider. A little boy plucks one of its legs from its body, and innocent, or say intrigued, that is, curious and not wanting to hurt, watches both the body and the one leg, each struggling to meet the other somewhere. Fifth, the earth, patient, the little boy, first innocent, and then in a habit of things. Then there's this other poem, which is in a way referenced in on the cover, about visiting an imagined London. This poem is inspired by one of Aga Shahid Ali's poems, um, which is also part of the epigraph here. There are two epigraphs. The poem is called London Upon Your Arrival. The first epigraph: we shall meet again in Petersburg, as though we had buried the sun there, from Osip Mandelstam. The other is from Aga Shahid Ali's The Blessed Word, a prologue. Kashmir, 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 and Kashmaya. The poem, London Upon Your Arrival. First, we shall meet again in London this time. I'm writing this in a letter meant for you. I no longer know your address. You left in a frenzy as if there would be no tomorrow. We shall meet again, but how will this promise hold? The sun will color the Thames in its sheer gold. We will try and hold the water in our palms like Shahid. I will say to you, I feel I'm at the ghat of the only world. Second, for me, this world I recite to you its names is London, Londinium, Londonian, Londino, Londinio, Augusta, Londiniensi, Londiniensium, Londinian, London, 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 or Linden, Londinian, London, Londinio, or as a fortress, Lunadin, Moon Fortress, or Longdon, Ship Fortress, or London, City of the Moon. I, having kept away from here, have exiled myself from this world. I will reinvent London the way Shahid mentions in passing. Mandelstam does Petersburg. I will shut myself in it, free from everywhere else. When you're in London and we've collected the sun on the Thames, I'll sit down with you under the lime, linden trees in Lambeth. There, I'll tell you about the birds. Caitlin, in a letter earlier, wrote that she's seen sparrows hurling themselves against the window panes, as though they had buried the sun there. Under the snow, you tuck yourself in an overcoat and walk to the shop at the corner of the street to get some hot chocolate, sprinkled over with cinnamon and a touch of cloves. A tree, its leaves gone, is hidden under snow. Maybe this is how we will imagine London forever after you leave. Third, we shall meet again. You will visit in autumn when the leaves will have covered the walks in colors as though the earth had split herself into feathers here, as though the ground were painted quince and carmine and tangerine. We'll meet again, but this letter has no address. Will this promise hold? When you're here in London, I'll find you at the port. You'll have made your hair into a ponytail or a bun. I'll have been there, awaiting your arrival. We will take the tube to somewhere, not meaning to have a place to go to. We will take a walk as the rain will pour undecidedly. We'll meet again in London, the way the sun meets the horizon in leaving, inevitably. The promise will be difficult to hold, but at the banks of the Thames, we'll catch the sun in our palms as though its sheer warmth could be fortified, say kept or made strong as if to protect from the world. Fourth, and you won't speak of return. Thank you. One last poem. My mother passed away last year, and this poem is in a way a tribute to her and is inspired by Miriam Nash's poem, one of Miriam Nash's brilliant poems. Miriam Nash was very kind to have written she agreed to write a blurb for Notes and Burials, and I would like to thank you for that. And here goes the poem. Prayer for my mother as a child, after Miriam Nash. Let me carry myself like a quiet emptiness in her school bag. Watch over her from inside a pocket I zipped up earlier from the inside. Inside, say her heart, that I'll talk to her years ago without her knowing. I'll go with her to places in her dreams, places she wants to go to but will miss out on. Manchester, Michigan, Mumbai, the Disneyland, Niagara, and Mount Abu. We'll ask strangers to click photographs of us on old Polaroids where we'll smile long before everything else. And she'll only know years later I was made from her, not long after. Thank you. This has been fun. And of course, many thanks to the poetry business for the prize. Um, and I've just a final note in Vase. I very much enjoyed listening to Sia's auntie poem, the wedding one, and I think the descriptions were very apt. And I hope you buy both of our pamphlets soon. Thank you.
Thank you, Jen. I loved getting to hear you read it, and I tell you what, I particularly witnessed that bit with green activism, green, etc. Those lines coming alive in your mouth. If you come back now and see it, we're going to have a Q&A. So if you had questions, you audience members listening in from either of those readings or from both of those readings, now's the time to pop them in the comment section. And I think Pete from the Poetry Business will send those this way. But I'm going to kick us off with a question that's a bit about your process. I'm quite interested in the fact that both of these, well, I'm always interested in how poets move from writing, particularly if they're writing individual lyric poems, how they move those into being a collection or a pamphlet or a body of work. And I know that for some poets, it's almost like a novel writer who plots it in advance and can see it from the outset. This is going to be my project. And I know there's others where you get the sense of where the phrase poetry collection comes from. They're writing individual pieces and they come together as a collection in the process. And I was wondering for both of you how that kind of happened. At what point did you feel like, okay, I'm not writing individual poems anymore. I'm writing a longer piece of work that is a cohesive whole, and this is what it's about. I just wondered if you could talk a bit about that. Don't know whether Sia or Jayant wants to kick us off on that.
Shall I go on?
Go on. Yeah.
Cool. Okay, this is Brian's question, right? So, Brian, I think the idea of a themed set, as an idea of a theme running through a poetry pamphlet, is very important because otherwise, it's to me, at least personally, to me, it's just a set of poems which may or may not relate with each other. In that case, it's just you begin somewhere and anywhere. And it doesn't really work as a collection for me or even as a pamphlet because maybe I'm running far here, but I think the point is that if there's no theme running through the set of poems, it doesn't really work as a collection. It just works as several poems scattered on a page, on different pages. So if one were to, and the idea of one basic pamphlet is that there has to be um, yeah, I think I'm being very repetitive, but the idea of the idea of a pamphlet is to have a small set of poems written in a very cohesive manner so that the reader can understand what you're trying to do with a certain type or with a certain theme. So if I'm clear here, I think that's why there has to be a sort of theme running through a poetry pamphlet. I'm not sure if that was good enough, but maybe I'll try again later.
I think it's great minds thinking alike because I think Brian's question was added to the chat at our end at the same time as I was saying the question. So we were talking about very similar things. I think we were saying slightly different things because I think Brian's asking how important it is to have an overall theme, and I was asking more about how in your process it emerged and at what point did you feel like you had a pamphlet rather than individual poems. But it's kind of interesting to hear that you're kind of like, okay, from the outset, that's what you need. Sia, would you like to come in and talk a bit about how it happened for Loeb?
Good question. I've been intrigued to talk to someone who sort of plots it out in advance because I can't really conceive of doing that myself. I'm quite a slow writer, so I wish I could be one of those people who churns out like 30 poems a month, but that's just not happening. So I had a sort of limited Google Doc that I had like tentatively called pamphlet for a while, and I hadn't really thought about, like, I was just writing these individual poems and I knew that they had things in common, like other than being written by me. Like there were things like I have a lot of Barbara poems. I have some Lady Diana poems. I have poems about like my family history and stuff like that. So I knew there were these sort of recurring things. But when I sent off the sort of sample for this prize, I knew I wanted bits of that, like all of those things in it. But I think when it was like, okay, you have like a set number of pages, how much do you want of each of these things in? That was the first time I'd really thought about it like that. And it has changed how I read other people's pamphlets now, because I'm trying to sort of work out how they went in with it. Like, did they decide I want to write 25 poems about this one topic, or did you collage it together? And also, I'm thinking of Brian's question too. I think I kind of want to challenge it a bit. I don't know if there is such thing as a themeless pamphlet, because if you're writing all of them yourself, there will inevitably be like sort of echoes between poems, or like interests, or like ways of ending a poem that, like, I don't know, I'm sure if I read 20 of your poems together, I'd be able to detect something of you in them, and that would be the theme. I don't know. Yeah.
I think that's particularly the case if it's happened in a particular passage of time. It's like what this person was thinking about in this period. It's always going to have some chimes. You spoke earlier, and you have a poem that references your zine making. And I was wondering how those two different creative outlets, your poetry and your zine making, talk to each other. And if there's other creative things you do that talks to your poetry, and kind of almost which came first. And I wanted to extend it to Jayant by asking if it's always been poetry for you and just poetry, or if there's other forms of writing or other forms of creativity that you work in, and whether that talks to your practice, or whether they tend to be quite compartmentalized.
Good question. I think for me, poetry defo came first, but sort of at the same time, I did a lot of like quite cringe collage making when I was younger, and I think I've only started taking it a bit more seriously now. I think what I like about scene making, or like especially if you're using like Riso, is the fact that you're making something, but you don't know how it's gonna show up, like once it's photocopied or once it's like in a different ink. So you're kind of like looking at what you've got in front of you, but you've half got in your head like how it's gonna look in a different form. And I feel like that has been like a useful way of thinking about when I write a poem. Like I can see what it looks like on the page, but I don't quite know yet how it's going to read in front of people, or like when it's all typed up. Yeah, I don't know. I think the poems that I have the most fun writing are the ones where I see something in a different form, and I'm like, how do I translate this? Like with that Indian wedding video one, I was like, I think these videos are really fun, but I don't really know how to make one. And I don't really have the time or facilities to like buy an old camera and do it from scratch and film a whole wedding. So yeah, I think I always have more fun when I'm like thinking, how do I turn something into language? Like when I was writing Detonator, I guess you can't really tell when I'm reading it out, but it's like quite skinny, and I was thinking about how do I evoke being on a roller coaster in a poem. There you go. Thank you, Holly. I know, Jayant, what do you think?
The detonator for people who want to see the
A visual aid.
top of it.
Yeah, I'm a maths guy. So let's when anyone talks about arts, I think poetry came first for me. I began in a way with fiction, but I've never succeeded with that. So and somewhere between writing one story and another, I began writing poetry. It was a prompt at school, which let's say would be 13 years ago, I think. So I began writing poetry in ways 13 years ago, and ended up getting published in 2017 for the first time. And I've never really looked back. So there's really no answer here, as in if there's a question anywhere, anytime regarding what would you prefer, whether if it would be poetry or drawing something. I've tried to draw things, but I'm not very good at that either. So poetry has always been the go-to art for me. I look at paintings, I get inspired. So I write a lot of ekphrastic poetry, but that's that.
Yeah, that's your input, but poetry is the output. Talk about other inputs. We've got a question from Tom Branford, and he says, thank you both for stellar readings. It would be great to hear what you were reading at the time you were writing these pamphlets.
Um, there's a there's a problem here in the sense that these poems were not written at one time, essentially. These poems for me were written over the period of 3 or 4 years in, I think, because there's a poem called Earth Fire in this one. It was a winner. It won the Wells Festival of Literature's Young Poets competition in 2021. So that was long ago. Yeah, that was long ago. So I wrote one poem then. I was thinking about the how the death of my grandmother and how we processed things, how we went through all the rituals at that time. Right, and after that, my mum passed away last year, as I mentioned. I wrote some poems after winning the competition, the Poetry Business New Poets Prize competition. I wrote some before because I had to compile a pamphlet, and I ended up deciding this would be the theme. Otherwise, I had several poems over the years written in on this theme, and I ended up just choosing the poems of a certain theme. But there is one book I read every year. It's also a sort of a ritual. I do it in December because I think that's the birth month of the poet. The poet is Agha Shahid Ali. I read this book called The Country Without a Post Office. I also read bits of Miriam Nash's All the Prayers in My House, and there are several others, but I'm not sure if I can recall all the names. So many of these poems are in ways responses to different poems at times. There's this other book by Zaina Hashem Beck. It's called Oh. It was published by Penguin a few years ago. So these three books would be my thing for this particular pamphlet.
Cool. And Sia, what would it be for you? And if you didn't, tell us if it's a similar thing where it's like, well, maybe they're not exactly at the same time as when you're reading, but do you have ones you go back to that are your go-to poetry collections if there wasn't something that particularly chimed with, oh, that was what I was reading when I was doing X?
Yeah, I have such a horrible memory, so I'm trying to think what did I read as I was writing and sort of editing these poems. I think when I was editing, I had a copy of Citadel by Martha Sprackland with me kind of at all times, which is a fantastic collection. Um, yeah, she does some really interesting stuff with Juana of Castile, that inspired lots of the Lady Di stuff in here. And also it was useful to look at what Martha Sprackland does with Juana versus Martha and be like, here are the things I want to do, but here are the things I also don't want to do. So it's useful to have something to kind of push against in that respect. I was also reading sort of the classics, love a bit of Mary Jean Chan. Safia El Hilo is one of my favorite American poets. I really love her work and I was reading a lot of it. Um, what else? I was also looking at a couple of the other like skinny little pavilion collections. I really loved Denise Saul's book, The Room Between Us, and Hannah Copley's Lapwing. But yeah, I don't know how much they necessarily fed into this as I was writing it. Um, One of my sort of keystone, is that the word, like touchstone books that I return to is the Staying Alive anthology with Blood Axe. I think that's sort of like a standard baby's first poetry book. But yeah, whenever I feel sort of uninspired, I have a little flick through and see. I feel like I always find something new every time I look through it. Yeah.
Can you talk a bit about because you've got it feels like you when I originally saw the submission for this, there were a couple of Lady Di poems, but it felt like when you expanded the pamphlet, more Lady Di appeared. She came out of the woodwork. And I was going to ask a bit about where that came from, and you might want to talk a bit about what Martha Sprackland did. It seemed to follow on because she does a similar thing with Castile in her pamphlet Citadel. Were you always fascinated by Lady Di? And I think when I take this question over to Jen, I'd be interested because I know that this isn't your first pamphlet, you've had two before. And have you always had a fascination with etymologies that you're using a lot in these pamphlets? Or was that specific to this pamphlet? And how did that become something, a theme that you're interested in, as a way to open things up and think about other questions. So, Sia, do you want to go first and tell us about Lady Di?
Me and my personal relationship with Princess Diana, we go way back. I think I was sort of obsessed with her before I started writing about her. Like it took me a while. Like, it took a while for me to even like consider doing that. Um, I think like Princess Diana has always been a sort of presence in my family. My dad's really obsessed with her, as like many sort of people of his generation are. But I think it was quite boringly watching season 4 of The Crown that sort of solidified it for me, and then got me into reading and watching and looking at all her outfits and trying to embody her in all these different ways. Um, yeah, I had a sort of breakthrough thought about my relationship with Princess Diana recently, which was, as much as I had sort of look up to her as a sort of aesthetic icon, you can see I've got a picture of her from my living room. She sort of came to me when I was thinking about, sounds like she's some sort of saint. She sort of came to me when I was doing a lot of writing, thinking about whiteness and beauty. And I wanted to, like, I felt very angry about it because it's kind of hard not to if you deep it too much. But also, she is like a figure who I have a great deal of affection for. And it felt useful to have someone who wasn't like, who I didn't hate, who I could use to talk about these things and my relationship with them. I don't know if that comes across necessarily in the pamphlet. But yeah, I think it's just nice to have someone you're very obsessed with and to have like a sort of persona you can delve deep into. I think that's also what drew me to her, is this idea of a persona and who someone who is fundamentally unknowable. So I decided when I was writing the Diana poems that went to this pamphlet, I didn't want to write in her voice or do like a sort of dramatic monologue persona thing that I've seen a couple of other poets do. I wanted the poems to be about her as like this sort of, yeah, like a character, or if like I think that's the word you used earlier. There's a really interesting poem in Martha Sprecken's pamphlet called, I think it's like Martha and Juana in Therapy, where she sort of puts herself in the same room as her. And I thought, I don't know if that would work. I think the whole point of me and Diana is that we can't be in the same room together. Like, yeah, well, you know all that stuff about like the poet and speaker or whatever. Yeah, I don't know. Don't know. Sorry.
No, I was just going to say, yeah, because you have those poems where there's one where it's like, don't do it, Di. It's not about, you're not pretending that you can know this person. You're saying, this is how I feel about them.
Yeah.
And it's a poem about you and your thoughts rather than pretending that you can
Yeah.
other person because they're a real person. That's interesting, yeah. So Jen, I'm intrigued. Can you tell us more about what sends you into these etymological wormholes that take us to these interesting places?
Right. I'm from a place where speaking English becomes a big thing. As in, if you're good at English and you're not at all good at school in any other ways, you're still considered a good student, because even if you know nothing, you can say something in a language that is in a way worshipped by people, almost worshipped. If you speak in your um, mother tongue, you're thrashed at school. At least it was then. I'm also old now. Let's say 15 years ago. It used to happen if we were caught not speaking in English, we would be thrashed. Yeah. So so I ended up taking my effort to understand English to the next level. I ended up trying to understand how words came about, because the problem is that we learn from people who sometimes don't know the actual pronunciations of words, because they've not had the opportunity to go through the phonetics of things. So sometimes I think the responsibility falls on our shoulders. I did just that. I tried to understand the phonetics of things, and to understand the phonetics of things, I had to break down words, if not just look at a dictionary directly. So to do that better, I ended up looking into the origins of words, and I think that's how the love for it began. So maybe, I don't know, 16, 17 years ago, I'm working on a full-length collection, which is currently titled Annotations on Blue. So it's just etymologies for blue, or yeah, etymologies and different perspectives on blue. So yeah, that was the answer. The love for etymology began roughly 15, 17 years ago. And the need for it was that I ended up becoming a bit too competitive. Just wanted to do better than everyone else at school, maybe. Thank you.
That's really interesting to hear about. I was gonna ask us to finish off by reading one more poem so we can send it away with one more poem for the book. I'm just cool. Have you got one lined up, both of you? I've not just thrown you in the deep end there. Looking for an answer.
Yeah, yeah.
So shall I invite who would like to go first?
See ya.
Well
You-
volunteered.
Cool, thank you. I think I'll read the first one in the pamphlet. It's called Behind. I'm obsessed with the thought of what my nanny's nanny will never know about me. My nanny told me my backside was curved like her nanny's, each cheek a question mark encased in cotton underwear. Once I wore shorts, and I swear my nannies followed me home with questions like, where are you going alone like this? What are you wearing? Where did those flowers come from? And who was it kissing you goodbye at the station? In the only picture I can find, my nanny's nanny is wearing white, facing forward, so there is no way of telling if we are in fact the same. I know our ovaries are loaded with identical pointed jewels, our bodies losing their softness once a month. Don't they say that you exist inside your mother and her mother? So I've been there, finally, inside hundreds of tentative wedding night kisses. Before me, small tongues waiting to unfurl in each mother's mouth. In the picture, my nanny's nanny is smiling like she has discovered an excellent fruit. I wonder what she would think of my head, sheared to kiwi fruit newness. I am her granddaughter's granddaughter. This much I know to be true. In the pictures, my Maya is wearing pink at her wedding. In the poem, I wear red trousers that cling to my hips. Or her hips, or hers, or hers, or hers. Thank you so much for having us. It's been so lovely. And thank you everyone for watching and for your questions.
Right. I love that poem. Shall I begin mine? Yeah, cool. This one is after one of Zaina Hashem Beck's poems. It's called Carrying. Carrying. In my religion, when loved ones die, their remnants, say remains, are set sail on water. We have not much to do with graves, but burial is a process that water leaves its memories on land and carries between graveyards, carries its memories from graves to graves that even after death our bodies must be heavy. From Old English, hifig, from German, heben, heave, lift up, and cannot dissolve in water, and water makes of our bodies memories and takes into unmarked graves. Rid, from Old Norse vrithia, to clear, to free from. In carrying, even water is bathed in broken light, from Old English lot, from Greek leukos, white, from between trees, like Christ is from his broken windows in a church. In Bangalore, the streets flow like water, and people find ways to surrender. From Old French, rendre, from Latin, redere, give back, submit for consideration, or the opposite of it. So many accidents, often the streets mimic graveyards like water, even where churches, mosques, and temples, palaces, and each god watches from their people walking between water and into their graves. Thank you.
Well done. It's fantastic.